The key that opened every door. In a town called Lomarsh, built where three quiet roads met beside a slow gray river, there was a small locksmith's shop tucked behind the greengrocer's, its window so narrow and so dusty that most passers-by never thought to look twice at it. Above its low door hung a single brass key, worn smooth and dark with age, swinging gently on a length of chain whenever the wind found its way down the narrow lane. This was the shop of Cornelius Hale, locksmith, though nearly everyone in Lomarsh simply called him the Keeper, a name that had settled on to him so gradually over so many years that even Cornelius himself had nearly forgotten there had ever been a time people called him anything else. Cornelius was neither young nor especially old, though there was something about the particular slowness of his movements, the particular patience in his pale gray eyes, that made most people who met him assume he had already lived a very long life and had simply chosen, out of some quiet wisdom, to live the rest of it without any hurry at all. He kept his shop open at odd hours, never in the bright bustle of midday when the town's business was loudest and most urgent, but often in the deep hush just after sunset, when the roads grew quiet and the lanterns in the windows began, one by one, to glow soft and gold against the gathering dark. It was said in Lomarsh that Cornelius Hale possessed a single key that could open any door in town, not through any trick of picking or forcing, but because the key itself was older and stranger than any ordinary lock, fashioned, some said, from metal that remembered every door it had ever passed through, the way an old friend remembers every conversation shared across a long friendship. But the key was not used, as one might first assume, to let people into places they had been locked out of, though it could certainly do that too, on the rare evenings someone arrived at his shop having misplaced their own house key on a night too cold or too wet to wait until morning. No, the key's true purpose, understood by everyone in Lomarsh who had ever needed it, was something gentler and stranger still. It was said that Cornelius's key could open, for a tired and troubled soul, not the door of their house, but the particular door inside their own chest that had swung shut, tight and stubborn, around some worry or grief or fear they could no longer find their way past. The story of how Cornelius came to possess such a key, passed down through Lomarsh's quiet evenings the way all such stories are passed down, began, as most good stories do, a great many years before Cornelius himself was ever born. It began, the old tale went, with a locksmith named Thaddeus Vane, who kept the very same lock shop behind the greengrocer's some 3 generations before Cornelius's own time, and who had built over the long course of his working life more locks and keys than any craftsman Lomarsh had ever known. Thaddeus had been by every account a skilled and careful craftsman, but he had also been, in the private hours of his own evenings, a man carrying a grief so large and so stubborn that he had never once found the words to properly set it down. He had lost his young wife early in their marriage, much the way certain other quiet tragedies seem to visit certain quiet towns more often than seems entirely fair. And in the years that followed, Thaddeus found himself, evening after evening, standing before the door of the small bedroom they had once shared, unable either to enter it or to finally close it away for good. He kept it locked in the end for want of any better solution, locked so thoroughly with so many bolts and so much iron that even he himself no longer possessed a key that could open it. It was not, he told himself, that he wished to forget her. It was only that he did not know how to carry the memory of her without the whole weight of it crushing him flat each time he tried to look at it directly. And so he had simply locked the door, and locked alongside it some equally stubborn door within his own chest, and told himself that this was simply how a person survived a grief too large to properly carry. But a locked door, Thaddeus discovered over the long years that followed, has a peculiar way of making its presence known even when a person tries their hardest to walk past it without looking. He found himself, some evenings, standing before that locked bedroom door for long, wordless minutes, his hand resting against the cool wood, unable either to turn away or to reach for whatever key might open it. And it was on one particular evening, some 10 years after his wife's passing, that he finally understood, with the sudden clarity that sometimes visits a person after a very long stretch of quiet confusion, that he did not actually wish the door to remain locked forever. He simply did not know how to open it without being entirely undone by whatever grief still waited patiently on the other side.
So he did the only thing a locksmith of his particular skill knew how to do with a problem of this shape. He went down to his workshop in the deep hush of that same evening and began, with slow and careful hands, to forge a key unlike any he had ever made before. Not from ordinary brass or iron, but from a strange dark metal he had been saving for years, gathered from the melted remains of every lock he had ever repaired that once, in some small way, had kept someone safe. A child's music box, a widow's jewelry case, a father's old writing desk. Into this metal, as he worked through that long and patient night, he poured every careful lesson his craft had ever taught him about the particular nature of locks. That a lock exists not to keep a door shut forever, but to keep it safe until the right hand at the right moment is ready to turn it. By the time the first gray light of morning found its way through his workshop window, Thaddeus held in his weathered hands a single brass key, smaller and plainer than he had somehow expected, given all the strange metal and careful intention that had gone into its forging. He carried it upstairs, his legs trembling slightly with a fear he did not entirely understand, and fit it into the lock of his wife's old bedroom door, and turned it, slowly, one careful click at a time. The door swung open at last, after 10 long years of staying shut, and Thaddeus stood in the doorway for a long moment, his breath caught tight in his chest, waiting for the crushing weight of grief he had spent a decade avoiding to finally, inevitably flatten him. But it did not come, not in the way he had feared it would. What came instead, standing in that quiet, dust-softened room, was something gentler and far more bearable. A slow, warm ache, certainly, but one he found, to his own great surprise, that he could actually carry, now that he had finally allowed himself to look at it directly, rather than locking it away behind 10 years of avoided doors. He wept that morning, for the first time since the funeral, and found in the weeping something he had not expected to find at all: relief. Thaddeus kept that key for the remainder of his long life, and it was said in the years that followed that he began quietly to lend it out to others in Lomarsh who came to him carrying their own stubbornly locked doors. Not literal doors most of the time, but the same kind of tight, stubborn barrier he himself had once built around his own grief. A barrier that felt, to whoever carried it, like the only possible way to survive a feeling too large to properly hold. A grieving mother might come, unable to speak her lost child's name aloud. A frightened young man might come, unable to face some failure he had buried so deeply he could no longer remember its exact shape, only the vague and persistent shame that lingered in its place. And Thaddeus would simply hand them the key, not to any literal door, but as a small, tangible reminder of the lesson his own long night of forging had taught him, that whatever door had swung shut inside their own chest could, when they were finally ready, be opened again, slowly and carefully, without the crushing weight they had spent so long fearing. The key was passed down upon Thaddeus's own passing to his apprentice, and from that apprentice to the next, generation after careful generation, until it arrived at last in the weathered palm of a young man named Cornelius Hale, who had come to the shop as a boy of 15, sent by his own worried mother, who had noticed over many months the particular hollow look that had settled beneath her son's eyes. Cornelius, as a boy, had carried his own grief, smaller perhaps than Thaddeus's own great loss, but heavy enough for a boy of 15 to feel entirely unbearable all the same. His own father had left the family 2 winters before, quietly and without much explanation, moving to a distant town and sending in the year since only the occasional brief letter that grew shorter and less frequent with each passing season. Cornelius had locked this particular grief away, the way boys of that age so often learn to lock things away, behind a careful wall of forced cheerfulness and busy distraction, telling himself and everyone around him that he did not think of his father much at all, that it did not trouble him especially, that he was simply too busy with his own concerns to spare the matter any real attention. But his mother, watching him grow paler and brittler beneath his careful cheerfulness, had recognized, with the particular clarity of a parent who had watched a child's whole life unfold, exactly the shape of the door her son had shut so tightly against his own pain.
She had brought him on a quiet evening, much like the ones this story has already described, to the small shop behind the greengrocer's, where the current keeper of Thaddeus's old key, a patient, elderly woman named Prisca, who had held the apprenticeship before Cornelius's own, sat waiting in the dim gold lamplight. "I don't need any help," Cornelius told her, with the particular stubborn pride of a boy determined not to admit how much he was actually struggling. "I'm fine. I don't even think about him." Prisca considered this claim with the same slow, unhurried patience she brought to every lock that crossed her workbench. "Perhaps not," she said gently. "But tell me, Cornelius, if you truly do not think of him at all, why does your whole face change just now, the moment I say his name aloud?" Cornelius had no answer to this, and found, to his own considerable surprise, that his eyes had grown suddenly wet, the careful cheerfulness he had spent 2 long years maintaining finally beginning, just slightly, to crack. Prisca did not press him further that evening. She simply reached into a small wooden box behind her counter and drew out the same worn brass key that Thaddeus himself had forged so many generations before, and pressed it gently into the boy's open palm. "This key," she told him softly, "does not open any door you could point to on a map. It opens, instead, whatever door has swung shut inside your own chest, around whatever feeling has grown too heavy to look at directly. I am not going to tell you what door it opens for you, Cornelius, because that is not mine to know. But I want you to hold it tonight and simply sit with the question of what door in your own heart has been locked for far too long." Cornelius took the key home that evening, turning it over and over in his hands, and that night, lying awake in his narrow bed, he found himself thinking for the first time in 2 long years, not of how busy he was or how little he cared, but of the particular sound his father's boots had once made on the stairs each evening coming home from the mill, and how much, in fact, he missed that sound more than he had ever once allowed himself to admit. He wept that night, quietly into his pillow, the way Thaddeus himself had once wept in his wife's dust-softened bedroom, and found in the weeping the very same relief his ancestor in this quiet lineage of careful keepers had once discovered, that the grief itself, once finally looked at directly, was heavy, certainly, but bearable. Far more bearable than the exhausting work of holding a door shut against it day after long day for 2 entire years. Cornelius returned to Prisca's shop the following evening, his eyes still faintly red-rimmed, and told her in a voice far softer than the stubborn one he had used the night before, "I think I found the door." "I thought you might," said Prisca gently, and asked no further questions, understanding, the way every keeper of that key had always understood, that what mattered was not the details of what lay behind any particular door, but simply that the person carrying it had finally found the courage to turn the key at all. It was in the years that followed that Cornelius, having felt for himself the particular relief of a long locked door finally opened, found himself drawn more and more to Prisca's own quiet trade, and began, at first simply by watching, and later by careful practice, to learn the whole of the locksmith's craft. Not merely the mechanical business of picks and tumblers, though he learned that too in time, but the deeper, harder business of recognizing in another person's careful cheerfulness or stubborn pride the particular shape of a door that had been shut for far too long. By the time this story properly takes place, Cornelius Hale had held the old key for some 30 years and had become, in that time, exactly the kind of patient, unhurried keeper that Prisca and Thaddeus himself had once been before him. A man who understood, better than almost anyone in Lomarsh, that a locked door is not always a sign of weakness, but is very often simply the only way a tired heart knows how to survive a feeling too large to hold all at once, until the day it finally grows ready to be opened. There was, among the townsfolk who visited his shop in those years, a young widower named Alden Rook, whose wife had passed some 3 years before, and had grown in the years since into a man so carefully composed, so relentlessly capable, that his own grown children had begun to worry quietly among themselves that their father had simply stopped feeling anything at all.
Alden came to Cornelius's shop one evening, ostensibly to have a simple lock repaired on his garden gate, though Cornelius, glancing at the man's carefully composed face, recognized at once the particular shape of the door he was actually carrying. "The gate seems fine to me," Cornelius said gently, after examining it for a long moment. "But tell me, Alden, is there perhaps another door in your life that has been sticking rather more stubbornly than this one?" Alden's carefully composed face flickered just slightly at this question, the way a candle flame flickers when a door somewhere in the house is opened, letting in a draft it had not expected. "I don't know what you mean," he said, though his voice had already begun to lose some of its careful steadiness. "I think you do," said Cornelius softly, and reached beneath his counter for the same worn brass key that had passed through so many careful hands before his own, and pressed it gently into Alden's palm, exactly as Priska had once pressed it into his own boyish hand so many years before. "Take this home," Cornelius told him, "not to open any door you could point to on a map, simply to sit with tonight and ask yourself what door in your own chest has been shut for far too long in the name of staying strong for everyone who still needs you." Alden took the key home that evening and sat with it as Cornelius had instructed, turning it over and over in his weathered hands, and found himself thinking for the first time in 3 long years, not of how capably he had managed the household or how well he had held everything together for his children's sake, but of the particular way his wife used to hum, quietly and off-key, while she watered her garden each morning, and how much, in fact, the silence where that humming used to be still ached every single day, far more than he had ever once allowed himself to properly feel. He wept that night for the first time since the funeral, and found in the weeping the same relief every careful keeper of that old key had discovered before him, that the ache, once finally looked at directly, was heavy but bearable, and far lighter in its own way than the exhausting work of holding it shut behind 3 long years of careful composure. Alden returned to the shop the following evening, his eyes still faintly red, and pressed the key back into Cornelius's waiting hand. "Thank you," he said simply, and Cornelius only nodded, understanding, as he always understood, that no further words were needed. Cornelius had, by this point in his long career, taken on his own apprentice, a quiet, watchful young woman named Marisol, who had come to him some years before, carrying a locked door of her own, and who had stayed on after her own door had finally been opened to learn the whole of his careful trade. It was Marisol who noticed in Cornelius's later years the particular new hesitation that had creeped into his own once steady hands, the way his own eyes had begun to carry some evenings the very same hollow look he had spent his whole career learning to recognize in others. Marisol herself had come to the shop some 15 years before this part of the story, as a girl of 16, carrying a locked door so tightly that even she, for the longest time, had not properly understood what lay behind it. She had grown up the eldest of 5 children in a small house at the far edge of Lomarsh, and had taken on, from a very young age, the particular quiet burden of the eldest child in a large and struggling family, the burden of always being capable, always being steady, always being the one who managed things so that her own tired parents might have one less worry to carry. It was her own mother, in fact, who had first noticed the trouble, watching her eldest daughter manage every crisis in the household with a calm efficiency that seemed, on closer inspection, rather brittle than calm, the particular brittleness of someone holding themselves together through sheer determined effort rather than any genuine ease. "You are allowed to be tired, Marisol," her mother had told her one evening, in the gentle but firm voice mothers sometimes find only when they have watched a child grow too capable, too young. "You do not have to manage everything. Some things are simply too heavy for a girl of 16 to carry alone, and it is not weakness to set them down." Marisol had not believed her mother, not at first, for she had spent so many years building her own careful identity around being the capable one, the steady one, the one who never needed managing herself, that the very suggestion felt at first hearing almost like an accusation of failure rather than an offer of relief. But her mother had persisted gently and had eventually brought her on a quiet evening to the small shop behind the greengrocer's, where Cornelius himself, not yet so very old, had sat waiting in the dim gold lamplight. "I don't need any help," Marisol had told him, echoing, without either of them realizing it at the time, the very same stubborn words Cornelius himself had once spoken to Prisca so many years before. "I manage everything just fine." "Perhaps you do manage everything," Cornelius had said gently, considering her the same slow, unhurried patience Prisca had once shown him. "But tell me, Marisol, when was the last time anyone managed anything for you?" Marisol had no answer for this question, and found to her own considerable surprise that her carefully composed face had begun, just slightly, to crack, the way ice cracks along some hidden fault line the moment enough quiet pressure finally finds it. Cornelius had pressed the old brass key into her palm that evening, exactly as it had been pressed into his own palm so many years before, and told her the very same words every keeper before him had told every troubled visitor who came through that low door, that the key did not open any door she could point to on a map, but rather whatever door had swung shut inside her own chest, and that she need not tell him what lay behind it, only sit with the question that evening of what it might be. Marisol had taken the key home and had lain awake that night, turning it in her hands, and had found herself thinking for the first time in years not of how capably she had managed her younger siblings' latest crisis, but of how desperately tired she had grown over so many quiet years of never once being the one who was looked after, always the one doing the looking after. She had wept that night, finally, for the exhausting weight of a burden she had carried for so long she had nearly forgotten it was a burden at all, rather than simply the shape of who she was, and had found in the weeping the same relief every keeper of that key had discovered before her, that the tiredness, once finally looked at directly, was heavy, certainly, but bearable, and far lighter than the exhausting work of pretending day after day that she did not feel it. She had returned to the shop the following evening, her eyes still faintly red, and had told Cornelius in a voice far softer than the stubborn one she had used the night before, "I think I've found the door." And Cornelius, exactly as Prisca had done for him, had asked no further questions, understanding that what mattered was not the details of what lay behind any particular door, but simply that she had found, at last, the courage to turn the key at all. It was in the years that followed, having felt for herself the particular relief of a long locked door finally opened, that Marisol found herself drawn more and more to Cornelius's own quiet trade, and began at first simply by watching, and later by careful practice, to learn the whole of the locksmith's craft, exactly as Cornelius himself had once learned it from Prisca before her. There was, in the years between Alden's visit and Cornelius's later hesitation, a small girl named Poppy who came to the shop one evening, no older than 7, clutching her own small wooden toy chest key, troubled by something she could only describe in the halting way of very young children as a scared feeling that won't go away even when I'm not scared of anything in particular. Cornelius had knelt down to meet her eye to eye, exactly as he always did with his youngest visitors, and had asked her gently whether she might like to see a very special key, one that did not open any door on a map, but rather a door somewhere inside her own small chest.
Poppy, delighted by the very idea of such a strange and magical object, had agreed at once, and had held the old brass key in her small hands for a long while, turning it over and over, before finally whispering in the smallest of voices that she was scared her parents' recent quarreling meant they might someday leave each other, the way her best friend's own parents did the previous spring. Cornelius had not promised her that her fear was groundless, for he understood, even with his youngest visitors, that false promises settle far less gently than honest company. He had simply told her softly that the fear itself, once spoken aloud rather than carried silently, tended to grow lighter whatever eventually happened, and had sent her home with instructions to tell her parents plainly and honestly exactly what she had told him. Poppy's parents, upon hearing their small daughter's carefully whispered worry, had been so moved and so troubled by how much weight she had been quietly carrying that they had, in fact, made a far greater effort in the months that followed to quarrel less openly in front of her, and to reassure her often and warmly that whatever disagreements passed between them, their love for her remained entirely unshaken. Poppy's own scared feeling, never entirely nameless again once she had finally found the words for it, grew softer and more manageable with each season, until it settled eventually into nothing more than an ordinary child's ordinary worry, easily soothed by an ordinary bedtime hug.
So it was on that particular quiet evening so many years later that Marisol found herself sitting across the workbench from her own aging teacher, watching his once steady hands hesitate slightly over a lock he had repaired 1,000 times before, recognizing in him, with the particular clarity of someone who has walked this exact path herself, the unmistakable shape of a door that had been shut for too long. "You should let me hold the key for you," she told him gently one quiet evening as they sat together at his workbench, "the way you have held it for so many others, for so many years." Cornelius looked up at her with the tired, faintly amused expression of a craftsman caught out by his own oldest lesson. "I suppose," he admitted softly, "that I have grown rather better over the years at recognizing other people's locked doors than my own." "Then let me help you find it," said Marisol. "What door has been shut too long, Cornelius?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning the old key in his own weathered hands before he finally answered. "I think," he said softly, "that I have never properly grieved my own master, Priska, though she has been gone now nearly 20 years. I was so busy learning to be strong for everyone who came through that door needing help that I never quite let myself be the one who needed it after she passed." Marisol said nothing, only reached across the workbench and took his hand, the same way he had once taken Olden's hand and Priska had once taken his own, and let the silence stretch on, patient and unhurried, for as long as it needed to stretch. Today, the shop behind the greengrocer's still stands, its narrow window still dusty, its brass key still swinging gently above the low door whenever the wind finds its way down the lane. And it is said in Lomarsh that if you visit at dusk, in that deep and settling hush between the day's last light and the evening's first stars, you may still find some quiet soul sitting at the old workbench, turning a worn brass key over in careful hands, working up slowly and patiently the courage to finally open some long locked door within their own chest. Nobody in Lomarsh can say for certain how many doors that single key has opened across all its generations of careful keepers, but perhaps, in the end, that was never truly the point of counting at all.
If you are tired now, wherever you are listening from, you might borrow a little of Lomarsh's old patience for your own resting tonight. Think first of a small brass key, worn smooth and warm by generations of careful hands. Think next of a door somewhere inside your own quiet chest that has stayed shut for longer than it perhaps needed to. You need not open it tonight if you are not yet ready. Simply notice gently that it is there and that it is allowed someday to be opened. Think of a patient hand, unhurried and kind, ready to sit beside you for as long as the opening takes. And let your final thought have no words in it at all, only the soft, settled feeling of a door easing open slowly into warm and gentle light. You need not wait for the thought after that one. It may never arrive, and that is exactly as it should be. That is the whole of what the keepers of Lomarsh have always known and have quietly passed down, key in hand, through every careful generation since old Thaddeus Vane first forged it in a single long and grieving night. That a locked door is not a failure to be ashamed of, but simply a heart's honest way of surviving until it is finally, gently ready. Rest well. The key is still warm. The door is still waiting. And somewhere, very softly, in a small locksmith's shop behind a quiet greengrocer's, a story is only just beginning to end.